Okay.
Welcome to the Cornwall War Museum on this bright and sunny day. We'll run through the squash court today, but above my head is the clock tower, and that was unveiled last year to commemorate 100 years of the RAF. So we have the RAF here, that's an RAF faced clock tower and 3 plaques which explain how the RAF was formed. To try and keep the officers, we will now enter the secondary role. If there had been a large loss of life on this airfield and the station mortuary wasn't big enough, this would have been pressed into service as the emergency mortuary. As we entered, these would have been the changing rooms originally. We got some Larkspur radios. That's the sort of kit I work with, C42, B47 there. We're still trying to get hold of an A13. If anybody's got a Larkspur A13, we'd be love to have it. Now, we've obviously fitted this squash court out with all sorts of displays in here. And we have a wartime shop. And kids are horrified when they come in. There's no Sony PlayStations or mobile phones or nothing like that. The ladies' shop selling finery, which will probably have been made in the 1930s, in the Art Deco period. Bit of a scene here. This is a bit of a war, a bomb site scene, I suppose. We've got a couple of genuine Home Guard uniforms. The Lancing one over there, and this one was Newquay. Spigot mortar, anti-tank weapon issued to the Home Guard. It wouldn't have done very much, but it did go bang, so they were delighted to have received that. And leaning against the wall at the back, we have what I call a dustpan and brush for the fire watchers. And during the air raid, these fire watchers would be out rushing around, crawling over the roofs, gathering up incendiaries before they could destroy everything in sight. And they'd have one of those. It comes apart where the black bit is, so you've got like a garden hoe one end and a scoop, and then they would then put it into sand to stifle it. All sorts of junk in here, look. Fantastic, isn't it? A cloud base recorder. That's this thing here. And what it would do would be 1,000 feet away from the control tower. And if it's low cloud, they switched on the light and it would go up and hit the cloud. And they have this little handheld thing, this little brass, simple device, and they could measure off the angle and work out how high the cloud is. Now they took those out and replaced them with millions of pounds worth of computers, but I reckon that did a far better job. Above our heads, an original scramble bell. That's AM Air Ministry 1938, so it's not from this airfield, but it is an original scramble bell. Sort of symbolic option type of effort with a map. The board shows what the squadrons at this airfield were doing on D-Day. At the back we got the large camera. That would have been loaded into a belly of a Spitfire or later on perhaps a Mosquito. Right. Here we've got some Lancing tubes. Forget that, I spelled it wrong. That's how it should be spelled. Lancing tubes. This came out of a communication centre in an RAF station, and the messages would come in on this ticker tape machine, and when they're decoded they would then be put into these little tubes here, sealed in there and shoved up one of these vacuum tubes, which would take it to one room only, so it couldn't be interfered with. So this one is actually quite recent. This was probably taken out about 10 years ago, and then it was passed on to us, and we're delighted to have it. A symbolic, I emphasise symbolic representation of the inside of an aeroplane, so we don't want people contacting us saying that bit in the right place, because it's all over the place. But never mind, there's the bomb site, there's the pilot, there's the radio operator, and there, of course, we have the very, very all-important, the sat-nav. There it is, that square board with all the gubbins on it, and you don't plug it into a cigarette lighter. The navigator's got to do all the work in it himself. And if he gets it wrong, you're all likely to end up in a big hole in the ground. Right, we move around this side. Some wreckage here of an aircraft that crashed, I think it's a Beaufighter, I can't read it without my glasses, but never mind, at Trelane near Redruth, and it just missed my grandparents' house. And my grandfather was the first one out. He pulled the dead crew members out of the aircraft because he thought it might catch fire. And just a few years ago, my cousin who still lived near there, he phoned me up and said bits of wreckage are coming up out of the ground, and this is some of the wreckage here. So this is from Trelane near Redruth. An original artefact of this airfield that has never left the airfield. And if we come up to this end here, it tells us what it is. David Stowe Moore, installation number 1, aviation spirit tank number 1. This is a dipstick from one of the fuel tanks out on the airfield. There were 2 BFIs, bulk fuel installations, one end and one the other, and this one was calibrated to number 1 BFI, number 1 tank, and it was being used by people just down the road as a clothes prop until we started doing the museum, and then they brought it over and donated it here. Up here, there's an orange aeroplane. Now that's a model made by the International Model Company of London. The wings and tail will just pull out. It's fabric on a frame, a little metal tube underneath, and they had rockets fitted, and they would fire them for the anti-aircraft guns to practice shooting down. A little label on the side, because most of them would be missed, would never be hit. They go for miles, and if you found one, you took it to the police station, they give you £50 in reward or something, so they could actually get them back. And that is original to this airfield. And one thing we mustn't miss, we have a collecting box here for the Gurkha Welfare Trust. The Gurkhas have served with the British since 1815. The best soldiers in the world, any Gurkha would lay down his life for our country without a second thought. And we're delighted here to have a collecting box in aid of the Gurkhas.